So if you've watched some of my other videos where I explain both Diablo 4 and Path of Exile, you remember the graph goes something like this. You're going to end up seeing Diablo 4 players enjoy the game a lot right out of the gate. It is going to flatline as they hit more of the end game, and then we see a either steady decline or just a straight flatline in terms of enjoyability with the game. Right here, peaking around level 70, right around completing the campaign, interacting with whatever in-game mechanics there might be, doing your first Durio run, attempting Uber Lilith. This is sort of the high point of the game right about here. And then after you've achieved these things, the in-game itemization, etc., goes down with the occasional artificial spike that might happen as people are either engaging with the new season mechanics as they come out, although some of these spikes have been quite good. Season 2 is notable, or creating, for instance, new characters. You might get these temporary spikes of enjoyability. Now, if you follow along with my Path of Exile explanations, you're going to know that the enjoyability of Path of Exile does not go up very quickly, and there's this giant gap that happens right about here. And this gap is what happens when people end up playing the game long enough to realize how much time it is going to take them to understand the game. This is hitting either the first difficulty spike in the campaign, maybe your first act boss, you hit Mervo or something like that. It could even happen as early as the beach, directly when you make your first character and open up the skill tree. So this beginning can happen quite fast where it drops off a cliff. But after that, if you continue to push through, then you're going to see the enjoyability graph slowly increase over time as players are learning Path of Exile, making new characters, figuring out new builds, and being committed to the game, until eventually you're going to see this continue the ramp as they try new game modes. Maybe they try hardcore, solo, self-found. Maybe they actually got their builds down, new season launch, they're enjoying it every single time more and more, until eventually we hit this apex right here of the Path of Exile enjoyability crossing Diablo 4, but it does take a significant amount of time in order for these games to cross over. AKA Path of Exile takes a significant amount of time to enjoy, whereas Diablo 4 offers that enjoyability right from the get-go, which is what makes Diablo 4 so well right in the beginning and be accessible to most players, but Path of Exile expand their enjoyability over time. So if this is what the graph looks like with the two current most familiar ARPGs in this genre, where does Last Epoch fit into this equation? So after playing Last Epoch, I think I've got down how I feel about Last Epoch as compared to these two. Now, we're going to know for a fact that it's going to be more enjoyable from the beginning than Path of Exile. Like I said, Path of Exile's barrier to entry for the average player is very high. One of the things that Last Epoch does so well is make the game easy to understand while you're playing it. But I think it's fair to say that Diablo, the first time you play Diablo 4, you are going to have a lot of enjoyment out of the campaign the first time. I think it does the campaign the best out of any of these games. There's good cinematics, voice acting, etc. And the problems with the game are after the campaign, but not during the campaign. Whereas Last Epoch's campaign is good. In my opinion, it's more accessible from a quality of life type of feature than Path of Exile, which makes the beginning of your game time in Last Epoch more enjoyable, but it's not as fun of a campaign, for instance, as Diablo 4. However, where Last Epoch starts to take over is right about the point that I was mentioning where Diablo 4 starts to fall off. And that is because what Last Epoch actually ends up having is a good amount of quality of life features that make the game not annoying as you continue. Right about at this point is the point in which Diablo 4's stash tab problems, lack of loot filter, once you get out of the campaign and start getting into the portion of the game where it's the grinding, etc., these quality of life features really start to become noticeable, which is why the game's enjoyability either flatlines or starts to cane. Whereas Last Epoch's both quality of life continues to allow you to enjoy the game, and then, in my opinion, flatlines a little bit here, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, allows you to continue to enjoy the game, as well as makes the respecking option very enjoyable as well. So we're also going to see Last Epoch getting these sort of artificial bumps like I was mentioning down here with Diablo 4, because respecking is quite easy, and that will give you these little jumps of enjoyment of, oh, actually, I don't want to play Smite, I want to play Judgment, or I want to play Warpath, or what have you, or I learned how to mix the two, or I got some unique item drops that actually are very impactful and build changing, and that ramps my enjoyability. Now, something you might say while looking at this graph, especially if you're a Path of Exile player, is, DM, why is Path of Exile lower in enjoyability than we have here of Last Epoch. I mean, you're a big Path of Exile fan. Surely you think Path of Exile is the better, more complete, funner game to play. Well, in my current iteration, I actually do. However, we have to keep in mind something. In order for you as a Path of Exile player to enjoy it more than Last Epoch, and I do believe, to finish this graph, I think Last Epoch does plateau at some point. I don't think it decays, for instance, as much as we're seeing here with Diablo 4, but I do think it will plateau in enjoyability until they add more in-game. And by the way, speaking of in-game, in my last dev review I did, or interview I did with Mike from 11 Hour Games on Last Epoch, they actually mentioned or gave us a sneak peek, letting us know that in 1.1 update, the one coming soon, is going to have a pinnacle boss focus. They're actually releasing basically more in-game content is their first primary focus. So I'm sure that that will help subside some of these concerns. But I think this is a flat line in terms of enjoyability, and it takes Path of Exile longer to be able to cross over that enjoyable plateau. And part of the reason of that is because of this respec system I am mentioning. In Path of Exile, in order to get the most out of the game and continue to enjoy it and continue to have this ramping that happens with the Path of Exile, you need to be committed enough to be cool enough with making new characters. It isn't until your second or third character that you really start feeling really good in Path of Exile. Like you're starting to ramp, you're starting to understand it. So your enjoyability continues to ramp, but only after that second or maybe third character. And often that coincides with additional seasons, meaning you have to wait for maybe there's one season right here and then another season right here. So it might take you quite a bit of time in order to have these seasons come out, in order to try again with the new character and to realize how much you actually love Path of Exile. This is what happened to me. It was my second league or season that I started to really start to enjoy the game. Whereas Last Epoch, this bar graph that goes all the way up here to peak enjoyability, this is all on the same character because of the quality of life, how well they do the respecking, the variety of builds, and how much you can continue just playing your main character throughout the entirety time. If you mess up your build, you can respec it again all the way from the beginning. So this is all before the 1.0 release, and it's arguable that this graph I actually might end up crossing over Diablo 4 even sooner because of the new faction system they have. But in the current iteration that I've played, this is sort of how I'm feeling about it. I do think the Path of Exile, in my opinion, even though some people say it's an unfair comparison and Path of Exile has been out 10 years and I had all this time to build, etc., I'm just going to compare them because right now you, the person watching this, is debating with my time that I have available after work, what game do I want to play? You're not wondering about in 10 years. So right now, I think Path of Exile, after you have a significant amount of time in the game, is more enjoyable in the in-game. I think this is fair, and most hardcore ARPG, not just hardcore from the death perspective, but grinder ARPG players will probably agree the Path of Exile is going to feel better the longer you play it over any ARPG at the moment. But that does not mean that you should only focus on this small bit of the graph up here, which is the last portion of the time in which you're playing the game. This right here, this journey that you have with Last Epoch all the way is enjoyable all the way through. So your first character experience is going to be really good all the way up until in-game, and it's going to be all right in in-game, and there are some changes we will have to see. 1.0, I haven't got to play 1.0. I was not part of the early access testers, so I will be playing it with you guys as well, and we'll have to see what happens in this portion onwards now that 1.0 is basically being released with the graphical updates, in-game changes, and then we know going forward from here on forward, this is more future here, the 1.1 is going to have more in-game as well going into the future. So that's currently how I feel about Last Epoch. If you're wondering, is this a buy? I've already recommended it in 2 other videos. I believe that if you're somebody who is going to spend 100 hours or less, you are going to have a fantastic time within your 100 hours, but there are plenty of people out, you can even see them in the comments of my videos talking about Last Epoch, that have thousands and thousands of hours into the game and quite enjoy it. It would be foolish of me not to mention that the variety of builds, which I have in all of my videos, basically, the variety of builds and making alts in Last Epoch is going to be a big focus. Trying out all of the different character classes is going to be quite enjoyable as well. There is one other thing to mention about, I did mention respecking quite often with these, and that's part of the reason that this ramps so much, is being able to respec and rebuild your character. Your mastery is locked. So this is sort of like almost your ascendancy, how you would pick like a Marauder, for instance, in Path of Exile. You can't respec that portion. So Path of Exile actually does have that, even though the quality of life side of it is not better, that respecking totalness of it is actually better in Path of Exile, whereas it's just more accessible in Last Epoch. So if I'm playing a Paladin, I cannot respec from a Paladin to a Void Knight. I would have to make a new character, but you can put points into both trees up to a certain extent. So just the one clarity point as well. That's about it. That's how I feel about it. I'd be curious to know people who've played both Diablo 4, Last Epoch, and Path of Exile to a large extent, how you feel about this graph, where you think I'm correct, where maybe this is incorrect. Leave your comments down below, and I'll be reading them. Love you all, and I'll see you on the next video. Consider subscribing or joining the live streams if you would like to. If not, don't worry about it.